The lantern swayed above the depot platform, casting its weary light across the cracked boards and the dust that never seemed to settle in this part of the world. Evelyn May Carter stood there with her baby pressed against her breast, the night wind biting at her shawl. Samuel whimpered in the hollow way that only an infant can, his small mouth seeking comfort while his mother's eyes searched the empty track. Her letter had promised a husband. The townsfolk had promised a new life. All she could taste now was the bitterness of waiting. When Jedediah Boone arrived, boots thudding heavy as his frame, there was no gentleness in his eyes. He looked Evelyn up and down the way a man might appraise a mule, and when Samuel began to cry, his jaw tightened as if he had been tricked. "What is this?" he said, his voice rough with scorn. "I ordered a wife, not a squalling burden." Evelyn's breath caught. She had rehearsed 100 ways of explaining, of softening the blow, but shame silenced her tongue. Samuel's wail grew louder, and with every note she felt herself shrinking into nothing. Jed spat on the boards, turned his back to her, and muttered loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "I won't be chained to another man's mistake." The words struck harder than a lash. Around her, whispers began to coil like snakes. Faces shifted, some with pity, others with a cruel glimmer. Evelyn clutched Samuel tighter, as though her very skin could shield him from their judgment. She wanted to vanish into the night, but the platform held her fast, forcing her to absorb the weight of their eyes. From behind her came a soft rustle of skirts. Clara, her elder sister, stepped forward with a steadiness that belied the tremor in her voice. "Mr. Boone," Clara said, her gaze direct. "It is me you should take." Evelyn turned sharply, panic lancing her chest. "No," she whispered, but Clara's hand pressed hers in secret, strong and reassuring. "You have the child," Clara murmured. "You need something more than land and money. Let me do this." Jed's eyes flicked from one sister to the other, suspicion clouding his features. But vanity won the argument. Clara was older, her figure sturdier, her eyes resolute. He gave a curt nod, and without another word, he motioned for her to follow. Clara kissed Samuel's brow and then Evelyn's cheek, leaving a damp trace of salt. With a final squeeze of her sister's hand, she walked away into the lamplight shadow, tethered now to a man's bitterness and a ranch's silence. Evelyn remained at the platform, emptied of breath, emptied of certainty. Samuel squirmed against her, sensing her despair. She whispered his name, rocking him gently, but inside she was unraveling. Around her, townsfolk shifted, some turning away, others lingering to feast on her humiliation. A woman muttered, "No man will have her now." A man chuckled under his breath. Doors closed when she passed, shutters drew tight. The shame grew heavier with every step she took away from the station. The road beyond town stretched lonely, the stars sharp as broken glass above. Evelyn walked with Samuel bundled close, each cry echoing in the hollow desert. Her shoes wore thin on the stones, and her body ached from travel and hunger. When her knees finally gave out by a fence post, she lowered herself into the dirt. The child clutched as though the earth itself might swallow him. The silence was wide, save for Samuel's whimpering. Evelyn closed her eyes, wishing for disappearance. It was then the shadow fell across her. She looked up, heart jerking. A man loomed there, tall, broad as an oak, his dark hair falling loose about his shoulders. His skin bore the weathering of sun and wind, his eyes unreadable pools. He was Apache, she knew by the cut of his buckskin, by the stillness that wrapped around him like armor. For an instant, fear clawed at her throat. He said nothing. Instead, he knelt and set a canteen before her, the leather worn smooth from use. His massive hands, scarred but steady, adjusted the shawl around Samuel. The baby quieted at the unexpected warmth, tiny fists unclenching. Evelyn could not summon words. Her body trembled with exhaustion and the dread of what might follow, yet something in the stranger's silence was not threat but shelter. His presence felt like a wall against the vastness of the night, and though her heart pounded, she did not recoil. The man, Nakwa, though she did not yet know his name, studied her with the gravity of one who had endured much and expected little. He offered no question, no judgment, only the quiet mercy of water and a blanket tucked firm around a child. The desert wind softened, as if even it paused to witness the moment. Evelyn pressed the canteen to her lips. Coolness flooded her mouth, metallic and life-giving. Tears welled unbidden, sliding hot down her cheeks. She whispered a thank you, voice cracking like dry wood. Nakoa gave the faintest nod, as though her gratitude required no sound at all. For the first time since Jed's words shattered her, Evelyn felt the faint stir of something beyond ruin, a thread of belonging, thin but unbroken. She leaned against the fence post, Samuel sleeping soundly now, the stranger's shadow cast over them like a shield. And though the night was still wide and cruel, it no longer seemed endless. Far off, the town lights flickered, and with them the gossip that would soon tighten like a noose. But here, in the hush of the desert, she was not yet defeated. She closed her eyes, clinging to that fragile truth, unaware that this silent guardian would change the shape of her life. The baby stirred, sighing against her chest. Evelyn looked up again, and the stranger's gaze caught hers. In his eyes, there was no pity, only recognition, as though he had carried the same weight once and knew the measure of survival. He shifted, resting his hand lightly on the fence rail, and the quiet of the night thickened between them. Evelyn's breath steadied, but fear and hope tangled within her, indistinguishable. Something told her this was not the end of her humiliation, but the beginning of a story far larger than her sorrow. The stranger's silence was not absence, but promise, and that promise trembled in the air like the first hint of storm. Her heart thudded as Samuel sighed once more, and the lantern at the depot guttered behind her in the distance. Evelyn could not see beyond the next hour, yet she knew this man would not leave her where she lay. And with that certainty, terrifying, bewildering, undeniable, the night shifted. Dawn found her in a place she did not expect. The stranger had led her through the gray hours to a hollow where the canyon opened, red cliffs catching the earliest fire of the sun. His dwelling was little more than a shelter of timber and stone, yet it carried the air of permanence. Smoke rose from a small fire pit, its curls steady against the pale sky. Evelyn shifted Samuel in her arms, uncertain whether to step inside, but the giant Apache had already placed a pot over the flames. The aroma of beans and wild herbs seeped into the chill morning, filling the silence between them with a kind of invitation. She sat upon a flat rock, clutching Samuel while her eyes followed the man's deliberate movements. He did not waste effort, and he did not look at her often. Yet every act seemed quietly for her, splitting kindling with a sure hand, laying a hide on the ground so she need not sit in dust, setting a wooden bowl within reach before she could protest hunger. Evelyn realized how long it had been since anyone had done something for her without expectation. The weight of that awareness pressed against her ribs until it ached. Samuel cooed at the warmth of the fire, his tiny hands reaching toward the light. The Apache, she still did not know his name, crouched and studied the child, his brow furrowed, not in disdain, but in thought. From a corner of the shelter, he drew forth a cradle board, smoothed by time and care. He touched its edges with reverence before laying it near her feet. For him, he said at last, voice deep as canyon stone. It was the first sound he had offered her. Evelyn's throat tightened. She ran her fingers across the leather straps, the small carvings etched in the wood. Someone had once made this with love. She looked at the man and found no arrogance in his gaze, only his steady patience. When she placed Samuel within the cradle board, the child quieted at once, as though recognizing safety. Evelyn whispered her thanks, but he only inclined his head, the faintest gesture of acknowledgement. That morning, she ate what he gave her. She drank from his tin cup, and for the first time since being left at the station, she felt her body unclench, if only slightly. Yet beyond the canyon walls, gossip traveled faster than any rider. 2 days later, she felt arrive. A thin cloud of dust rose on the horizon, carrying the town's judgment toward her. Samuel whimpered as the rumble of hooves approached. Evelyn stood outside the shelter, heart racing, while the Apache remained still at her side. He had told her his name the night before, Nako. She held the syllables close like a secret charm, though now it seemed fragile against the oncoming storm. Jedediah Boone rode at the front, belly straining against his vest, bitterness darkening his face. Behind him clustered 3 townsmen, eyes narrowed, rifles slung across their saddles. "There she is," Boone spat. "The bride who thought herself too fine for me, crawling in the dirt with a savage." The words burned, though Evelyn forced herself not to flinch. Samuel began to cry, his wail piercing the canyon air. Boone sneered at the sound. "You've disgraced yourself and every decent family here. I'll not have this child, this bastard, grow up a scandal among us. Hand him over." Evelyn's knees trembled, but something fierce rose inside her. She pressed Samuel close and shook her head. Her voice, though thin, carried across the dust. "He is mine. You will not touch him." The townsman shifted uneasily, but Boone laughed, a cruel sound. He gestured at Nakoa. "And you stand aside. You think you can protect her? You'll bring nothing but more shame upon her name." Nakoa did not speak. He stepped forward, the sun catching the scar along his jaw, his shadow stretching wide enough to cover Evelyn. His silence was heavier than any curse. Boone's horse snorted, sensing its rider's falter. The men's rifles gleamed, but their hands hesitated. Something about Nakoa's stillness unnerved them, the calm of a man who did not bluff. Evelyn felt the moment hang like a taut rope. Then Boone, goaded by his own pride, swung his rifle toward her. Samuel wailed louder. Before the trigger could be pulled, Nakoa moved. His arm lashed out, striking the barrel aside with such force that it clattered against the rocks. In the same motion, his massive hand closed around Boone's wrist, twisting until the rancher howled. The sound echoed like a wounded animal through the canyon. The other men stirred, but did not fire. Nakoa's glare held them fast, a wordless warning that chilled their marrow. Boone stumbled back, clutching his arm, his bluster unraveling into cowardice. "She's ruined," he shouted, though his voice cracked. "Let her rot with you." With that, he scrambled onto his horse and spurred away, the others following, their shame cloaked in dust. The canyon fell quiet again, the echo of hooves fading into distance. Evelyn stood trembling. Samuel pressed her chest. Tears blurred her sight, but not from fear. Something else surged within her, sharp and liberating. She turned to Nakoa, breath uneven. You saved us." His gaze softened, though he said nothing. Instead, he reached out with one calloused hand and brushed away a tear from her cheek. The touch was gentle, deliberate, and it pierced her more deeply than any vow. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Gratitude felt too small for what she carried inside. The fire that night burned low, casting amber light across stone walls. Evelyn sat close, watching Samuel sleep in a cradleboard. Her heart no longer felt hollow. Instead, it pulsed with a strange strength, as though her spine had straightened beneath the weight of all she had endured. Across the flames, Nakoa's profile was carved in shadow, silent yet present. She realized then that his quiet was not emptiness but steadiness, the kind of silence a woman could rest inside. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint traces of laughter from the town far beyond the canyon. The world would not forgive her easily. She knew gossip was a beast that fed endlessly. But tonight, she was not alone. Her shame had not destroyed her. She had stood, and she had been defended. Evelyn laid her palm over Samuel's chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. Then she glanced toward Nakoa. His eyes met hers across the fire, and for a moment the world narrowed to that gaze. Something unspoken lingered there, recognition, perhaps, or a promise that did not need words. Her heart beat hard her throat. She could not yet name what was forming between them, but she knew it would change everything. And as the fire crackled low, Evelyn understood that the story she thought had ended in disgrace was only beginning, and its next chapter would be written in the silence they now shared.